Hi, my name's Kelly Redding, and today I'm going to be talking about Ruby Bridges. Ruby Bridges was a small child. She was about 6 years old, and she made a huge impact on civil rights. And the way she did that was because she was one of the very first students to be integrated into an all white school. This was back when the law was separate but equal, so they had water fountains for black people and water fountains for white people, and bathrooms for black people, bathrooms for white people, and the same went for schools. Schools for white people, schools for black people. Separate but equal. But in 1954, the NAACP challenged that in the trial Brown versus the Board of Education. They fought against the Supreme Court, saying that separate but equal in schools was unfair. It was unconstitutional. So they declared that that was true, and they started integrating schools. But New Orleans, because it's deep in the South, fought it for forever, didn't want schools to be integrated, and it wasn't until about 6 years later that they finally integrated some black students into the school, and Ruby Bridges was one of them. So you might have seen the famous painting of her being escorted by marshals, and that was supposed to be depicting her first day of school, but she was actually escorted almost every day that whole entire school year. So basically, Ruby, I'm assuming they tested most of the students. She tested really well on this test that they gave to see who they wanted to integrate into the white schools, and it was brought to her parents, and the people that tested her said, hey, she is, passed this test with flying colors, and she is eligible to integrate into this white school. We're trying to get integration going, and all that. And her mom was all for it. Her dad was really worried that, she would get hurt. There's lots of violence that happened when integration was happening. There were a lot of people that didn't like change, didn't, want things to be different. And anyway, so the first day of first grade. So she spent her whole entire kindergarten year at a school that was like miles from her house. She had to ride the bus and all sorts of stuff to go to her school, and she loved it. She loved her teacher. But the school that she was integrated in was only 5 blocks from her house, much closer. So the marshals and her parents walked her to school on the first day, and she spent most of the first day in the principal's office. And it was really sad because actually most of the parents from that school ended up pulling out their students because they didn't want to be in a school that was doing segregation, or they were in fear of their students' lives as far as all the violence that came segregating the school. And actually Ruby spent her entire first grade year, because they had segregated the school but not segregated classrooms yet, in her own classroom with her very own teacher, Mrs. Mrs. Henry, sorry. And so she spent the entire year, she was the only student in her class, and it wasn't until her second grade year that they finally hit integrated classrooms. So she got to be in a class full of other black children and other white children. Very segregated, very wonderful. She loved Mrs. Henry, but I'm sure she was glad to be with kids her own age. The school that she attended was William Frantz Elementary, and that was the one that got segregated. Something that stood out to me when I was doing research was, even though there were a lot of people protesting and persecuting Ruby and her family and school for the integration, there were actually a lot of people that went out of their way to keep an eye on the school, make sure that she was safe, make sure there wasn't any sketchy behavior going on. So though a lot of people freaked out and didn't like change, there were a lot of people that were all for it, and I'm assuming most of them are white, having it being a school in the white community. And so her entire first year she was escorted every day by the marshals, but her second year she was able to go to school safely, and the protesters had died down quite a bit. And one thing that really stood out to me, I found it on pbs.org, and one of their articles about Ruby Bridges, and I'll post all my sources and stuff in the comments below. But when Ruby had looked back and was recalling her first day, she had thought. So there were lots of barriers up, and those were to keep protesters out, and she was being escorted by marshals, and it was just lots of chaos and violence and shouting. And her being only 6 years old, she thought it was just a Mardi Gras event. She didn't think that anyone was angry at her, that any of the violence was going on towards her. She had no idea that they were there to keep her out of school. And the reason that this stood out to me and was very personal for me was just like seeing the unconditional love of children. Children aren't born racist. No one's born racist. That's something that's taught. And, taught, passed down from parents to blah, blah, blah. And so, like, kids are just so loving and so innocent, and I just really feel like racism shouldn't even be a thing anymore because it shouldn't be something that's taught, and it's something that we can stop completely. Anyway, it was just really fun learning about Ruby. She's a really cute little girl. Yeah, and integration was great. Another thing that really stood out to me was the hope that it gave these children that didn't really have hope before, because even though the teachers in these all-black schools were qualified, they had classes stuffed full of children, they had minimal books and minimal resources, and so the kids really didn't have an opportunity to learn like the kids in the white schools did, and so the all-white schools did. So integrating them and just making them school where kids go, they were able to, have more resources available to them, have better class sizes, teachers that maybe, had gone to school for it, because I think even sometimes they would just throw in whoever to teach these African American students, and I just think education is so important for everyone, and I'm so glad that it's been extended to every child everywhere, and regardless of race or skin color or anything, everyone deserves to have an education, everyone deserves a bright future, and I'm glad that Ruby Bridges kind of paved the way unknowingly, because she was just, so cute and innocent, but she paved the way for lots of students to have that future available to them.